everybody, and welcome back to CNC RC Adventures. Today we are going to continue our series on upgrading the SCX24. Remember in our first video we upgraded to these beadlock wheels and Enduro tires. We also upgraded the steering linkage, the servo horn, and the servo itself. We talked about why we did that in the first one. If you haven't seen that yet, I'll put a link. You can go back and watch the first part. Today, we're going to continue working on this vehicle. We're going to look at some things like center of gravity, and then we're going to upgrade the power in the vehicle. So, let's get started. The first thing we're going to look at is the center of gravity on the vehicle. We're going to start by talking a little bit about what center of gravity is. I'm not an engineer or a scientist or anything like that, so this is going to be a very simple explanation. But if you have, we're going to use these bricks here to demonstrate the center of gravity principle. If you have these bricks, we have 6 of them stacked up. They're all the same. They all weigh the same. So in this situation, the center of gravity is right here in the center. So what does that mean? Well, and why is that important? If you're talking about something like a vehicle like this, if it's on flat ground, it doesn't really matter where the center of gravity is, it'll be fine. But these vehicles, we like to drive them up and down hills and up and down rocks and things like that. So center of gravity becomes very important. For this demonstration, we're going to pretend that these bricks are our vehicle and that this piece of plastic is the rocks that we're driving up. So with something tall like this that has a pretty high center of gravity, it doesn't take much elevation for it to tip over. So now I've rearranged the bricks, same number of bricks, but in a lower configuration. That puts the center of gravity right about here. And what that does is it lets us get a much higher elevation before it tips over. So the distribution of weight matters a lot in center of gravity as well. So with these bricks, the way they're configured, the center of gravity is somewhere around here. And as you can see, the base is a lot narrower than the top. So it doesn't take much to make it fall over. However, if we take the weight that's already there, move it down to the bottom, give it a wider base, narrower top, we get a lot more elevation before it tips over. So how does that relate to this SCX24? With the bricks, they were all the same brick, same density, same everything all the way through, so it was easy to find the center of gravity. With a vehicle like this, with different materials and things in different places, it's hard to find it. There's probably a scientific formula, but we're not going to get into that. That's beyond what we're talking about here. But basically, if you imagine for a second that, let's pretend the center of gravity is here. If we can lower that center of gravity to down here, naturally it's going to perform better and be able to climb steeper things without tipping over. So how are we going to change that center of gravity? Let's look at the parts that we're going to be adding and changing, and I'll explain to you what they're doing. So once again, we've got some Enduro upgrade parts that we're going to be installing. We're going to install these brass diff covers. We're going to install these brass axle wideners. We're going to install these carbon fiber chassis rails. So if you think back to our explanation with the bricks, we're taking the weight, moving it from higher up in the vehicle to down lower in the vehicle. And yes, because these are brass, we actually are adding a little bit of weight, but it's accomplishing the same thing. You could do the same thing by removing material up top. If you know, however much these diff covers weigh, if you removed that much material, if you remove the cage, the driver, whatever, it would kind of do the same thing, but we're not, that's a lot more work and a lot more modification than we're really going to get into. We're doing modifications that are pretty simple and can be accomplished pretty easily without, you know, cutting into things and doing stuff like that. So the whole idea that we're going for here is whatever weight we have on the vehicle, we want it to be as low as possible, and we want to make it wider. Wider because when it's on side hills and things like that, it keeps it from tipping over. Now you can go too wide. You can add various parts and make it really, really wide, and yes, it'll be hard to tip over sideways, but it's hard to make it steer, and it causes other problems. So if you're going to go wide, you will probably want to do it kind of in moderation. Just do it in little small steps at first, like with these wideners, and just see, you know, how that goes. So let's get started installing some of these parts. So we're going to go on and install these axle wideners. In the kit, you get 4 of these extended hexes, 4 of these barrel nuts, and you also get some extra axle pins in the bag. We're not going to use them. They're just always good to have as spares. The stock ones will work just fine. And these are brass, but they're coated in black, and they make some solid brass ones too. They're the same thing, they just look a little different. So to install them, it's pretty easy. We're going to take our 4mm wrench. We're going to take off our wheel. And the lock nut that was on there, we're not going to be reusing. But just save it because you'll probably need it for future projects or something like that. We're going to remove this plastic hex because we're not going to be needing it. But again, save it because you'll be needing it for something else, I'm sure. Make sure that this little pin doesn't fall out of the axle. The extended hex itself has a flat side and then a side with these ridges and a groove. This goes towards the vehicle, and the axle pin just lines up in that groove. Make sure your pin is centered. Slide it on. And you'll notice that the axle doesn't stick out past the extension, and that's what we need this special barrel nut for. It's got threads inside it that'll go actually inside of the hex and grab the threads. We'll put our wheel back on. And one thing I like to do with these, because it's metal screwing on the metal, the stock nuts have a little piece of nylon in there that locks things in place. These don't, and I have seen them get lost. I'm going to take some thread locker, the blue thread locker. I'm just going to put a tiny drop inside it. That's all you need. You don't need much. I'm going to put it in the wheel. Just push it down until it meets the threads. Then I'm going to take my wrench and I apologize, I'm just now realizing that this one is a little bit bigger size than my 4mm wrench. So give me 1 second to grab the other wrench. Okay, I'm back, and I apologize for that. I didn't actually have the right size box wrench, so I've got this old tool from some other vehicles that will fit. But I'm going to put a link in the notes to a better tool that you can buy that will make this easier. If you have something like this, it'll work. But I'll put a link in there that'll make things easier for you. So we're just going to screw it down. And we're going to do like I did before. We're going to tighten it down and then back off about 1/4 of a turn. So you can see this side has the extended hex on it. This side doesn't. So you see how much wider it makes the vehicle. So now I'm going to go on and just add the other 4. Okay, so now we have all 4 of the extended hexes installed. You can see this is a C10, which is a little different, but the width is the same stock. So you can see how much wider it is over a stock vehicle. And this will really help us not roll over as easily to the side. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to replace the stock plastic differential covers with these brass covers. And what that's going to do, it's going to put some more weight right in the center bottom of the back and the front of the vehicle. So that's again moving weight down lower. So when you're climbing, things like that, it's got more weight holding it down to the ground to keep it from rolling over backwards or rolling over forwards, things like that. So in the set that I'm using here, it comes with 2 diff covers. It comes with a full set of screws, and these actually come with new bearings. Most of the ones I've seen do not come with new bearings. You have to reuse the ones that are in there, and you can sometimes damage them taking them out and putting them in the new diff cover. So that's a really nice touch that Endura does. I didn't know until I opened these that they did that. So those bearings just go right at the top. There's a little round indentation on the inside, and the bearing just pops right in there like that. So I'm going to do those. And then we're going to show you how to replace it. So there's 6 screws that hold the differential cover in place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're just going to take those out. And I'm just going to take these off camera. You've seen me take screws out. Okay, so we have all the screws taken out. And the diff cover should just lift straight off. You can see the bearing inside there just stayed in the cover. We won't be using that bearing for anything right now, but that's the same size as most of the other bearings in the vehicle. So just hang on to this in case you mess up a bearing, you can replace it. Inside it, you'll see the gears that actually make the differential turn. I don't know if they put anything in it from the factory, but it doesn't feel like much. So I always put a little dab of some kind of grease or lube or something on there. You can use most any kind of grease. I use this silicone differential lube that's made by Associated. And I'll put a link to that, but it's made for the differentials in bigger cars, but it works just fine on this. You don't need much. So I'm just going to put a little drop on it. That's all you need. Then I'm going to put the new differential cover on, and I want to make sure that when I do it, I'm just putting it on straight, get the bearing lined up, get everything else lined up, and just press it on. There shouldn't be any resistance when it's going on. It should just sit down on it by itself. Then we're going to screw it on, and when you get this differential cover, it comes with 2 different length screws. The shorter screws go in these bottom 4, and the longer ones go in these top 2 spots. Now at this point what I'll do is I'll turn it on, drive it for just a second, just make sure everything's working and nothing's bound up. And then we're going to go and do the front one. So for the front, it installs the same way, but you're going to have to remove a couple things to get to it. The easiest thing to do, I think, is to just remove these two screws from the steering link. And then once you have that out, you can take the whole linkage in the servo and just kind of turn it all to one side. Get it out of the way, and then you can get to the screws for the diff cover. One thing to remember, I'm not going to show you installing this because it goes on the exact same way. The two top screws go through this servo mount. So just pay attention when you're putting it back together that they go through the mount so that everything will line up like it's supposed to. Okay, so we have the front diff cover installed. Now we're just going to move our steering horn back over, and we're going to put the screws back in that hold the link to the knuckles, and we should be good to go. And because you didn't actually take this horn off, it shouldn't mess up your steering trim or anything like that. That should all be good to go. Okay, now that we got everything put back together, I'm just going to hook everything up, turn everything on again real quick, and just make sure everything's still doing what it's supposed to do. Nothing rubbing, binding, making any noise. So it looks like we're in good shape. Okay, for this next step, I'm going to actually install multiple parts at one time. And the reason is the things that we have to take off and put back on are kind of the same for a lot of them. The carbon rails that I showed you earlier, they're going to replace these steel rails here. And the carbon's a lot lighter. I mean, not a lot lighter, but lighter. So again, that's still going with that same principle of moving the weight down towards the bottom of the vehicle. So less weight up top, more weight down low. I'm also going to be installing a new motor. Once you start adding weight, bigger tires, wider tires, things like that, it's not uncommon for the stock motor to not be able to keep up and burn up on you when you're doing it. So we're going to install a bigger motor with more torque and more power to help us. And plus, who doesn't like more power? We're also going to install a set of high clearance suspension links. And the purpose behind those is there are some times when you're out, I'm just going to use this box to demonstrate. You're out driving and the back end will get hung up. The links will get hung up on an edge, and it'll keep your wheels from being able to touch and get traction. So with these high clearance links, we're going to lessen that issue, and you'll see when we're done how that looks. So before we get started with this next part, I'm just going to show you the different parts. Here's our carbon rails. There's a left and a right, which we'll talk more about when we start putting them on. Motor. And you can buy it with or without this motor plate. Personally, I think it's a lot easier to just use the motor plate that comes with it. And it's not, I think it's like 50 cents more to get the motor plate and the pinion. So I would just get the whole thing. And we're going to use this little pinion gear that comes with it. Here are our suspension links. And it comes with upper links. In the front is this Y-shaped link. In the back are straight links. And then the lower links are the bent ones, the front are the short ones, the back are longer. And this is in a deadbolt and a Betty. The front links are a lot shorter than the back links. In a Jeep and a C10, the front links and back links are closer in size, and they're not interchangeable. So when you're ordering them, make sure you order the ones for your vehicle. If you have a Jeep or a C10, order those. If you order if you have a Betty or a deadbolt, order those. They're going to install the same way no matter which one it is. And as of this video, I know the new Gladiator has been announced. It hasn't really gotten out yet, so I don't know the situation with the links on it. I don't know if they're different, if they're reusing links from other ones. We'll talk about that later once those start getting in people's hands and we see, you know, what that looks like. But just from seeing the pictures of it, installation on that will be the same. You'll just have to make sure you order the correct links for the Gladiator. Chassis rails are going to be the same for all of the vehicles, or for the Betty, deadbolt, C10, and Jeep. They're all the same. I believe the Gladiator uses new ones. Again, I'm not sure, so we're not going to, you know, I know this is kind of weird timing that the Gladiator is just coming out when these videos are coming out, so these may or may not relate to the Gladiator. The motor is the same, and the motor plate's the same in all of the four. And again, I think that's going to be the same in the Gladiator too. Once it comes out, I'll try to do an update video later on once I get my hands on one of those and just kind of see what the differences and things are. So, having said all that, let's get started. Okay, so to start with, we're going to go on and put these high clearance links on. You do have to assemble the links. You have to put the pivot balls and the O-rings on. I did that off camera, but I demonstrated the way I do it in the first part of this video, so I'll put a link to that so you can see how I do that. It's pretty straightforward. So there's really not much to putting these links in. You're basically taking out the links that are there and replacing them with these links. I'll do a couple for you just to see, but it's pretty straightforward. It does not come with, these links do not come with screws, so you're going to reuse the screws you're taking out. And you are going to have to take the wheels off to get these links changed. So in hindsight, we probably should have done it earlier when we were putting on these extensions, but oh well, it is what it is. So I took out that front screw. I'm just going to take out this back screw. There we go. And of course you want to make sure that you're matching up the links with the links you're taking off. So this is the long link in the back. So I'm going to replace it with this link that's the same length. You can see they're not all the same length. So you just want to make sure, obviously, that you're replacing the links with the one that's the same length as the one you just took out. so. Make sure that the O-rings and everything are seated correctly. They look like they are. Okay. And again, when you're tightening these things down, remember you're tightening them into plastic, so don't over tighten them. And what I'd like to do is once I get one end in, I just kind of wiggle it and make sure it should move up and down and side to side pretty freely. If you get any kind of binding, take it back out and check the O-rings and make sure everything's moving freely, make sure the screws are in straight and all that kind of stuff. But if you take your time putting them together, take your time installing them, you shouldn't have any problem. Sorry for my hand in the shot. Give me 1 second. Let me get everything lined up here. This one's a little tricky to line up. You just got to make sure that the little brass pivot ball is lined up with the hole when you're putting the screw through. So it kind of takes both hands to do that. So I'm sorry, you can't really see what I'm doing, but just trust me. There we go. There, so there's one link. Everything's moving freely, flexing freely. So now I'm just gonna go on and put all the rest of them in. Wanted to point out one thing real quick. On the front Y link, if you look at it, one side has got a section where it's kind of carved out or hollowed out. That goes towards the drive shaft. So looking at your vehicle with the wheels down, that carved out part will go down. This part that's flat will go up. That way you have, sorry, it's kind of apart right now, but that way it has clearance over top of the drive shaft. So make sure when you're putting it in that you put it in the correct way. Okay, so we have now all of the links installed. And again, you just want to make sure everything's moving freely. It is. So I showed you earlier how you can get bound up on things when it's climbing. So now you can see there's a lot more clearance for the tire to actually grab and get traction before the link hits. And same in the front too. Okay, so at this point, we have, from the first video, we've added the new wheels and tires and the links and the new servo. In this one, we've changed the suspension links, we've added the wideners, and we've added the brass diff covers. So that's really helped us tighten everything up, get more traction, move some weight down low, make it wider. When you start doing things like that, start adding weight, start putting wider tires on, things like that, it's going to put a lot more strain on the motor. So our next step is we're going to replace the stock motor with this motor from Endura. Taking the motor out is really not that hard. I've already taken the battery out, obviously. We want to go on and unplug the motor. And then we're going to start by taking off this battery tray. And there are 2 screws here and on the other side. So take those 4 screws out, the battery tray comes right out. We're going to be reusing this, so we're just going to set it to the side. Now to take the motor out, see if you can see it. There's 1 screw right here, and there's 2 screws on the bottom. So we're going to take out those 3 screws, and the motor and the transmission and everything will come out as 1 unit. And our motor comes out, and the 2 halves of the drive shafts will come out with it, and that's fine. Just get that screw out so I don't lose it, and set the rest of the vehicle to the side because we're going to focus on this right here. The first thing we want to do is take this cover off so we can get to the motor. And there are 2 screws on the back that hold that on. And just kind of pay attention when you're taking them out. Some of these screws we're getting ready to take out are longer than others. So just pay attention, where they come out. So you put the long screws back where the long ones go, short ones where the short go. Those 2 screws, transmission cover just comes right off. So we have our stock motor, pinion gear, spur gear. One of the things that we'll notice, you'll see here, actually let me take this motor out so you can see it better. Give me 1 second. For these screws, you're going to need a 1.5 millimeter hex wrench. So these screws are different than everything else on the vehicle. You see they're little tiny short screws. That screw may not come out yet. We may have to take the spur gear out to get that out. Okay, so the next thing we're going to need to do is take off this spur gear to get the screw out. However, in order to do that, we first need to take off this part of the drive shaft. There's a screw that goes through one side of the drive shaft. So we'll just unscrew that. And the drive shaft just pulls right off. This nut that holds on the spur gear is the same size nut as the stock wheel nut, so whatever wrench you have for your stock wheels will fit this. Just hang on to the spur gear at the top so it doesn't spin while you're trying to unscrew it. Make sure you save this nut. Spur gear just slides straight off. Get that other little screw out. And so this is what we have. So looking at the stock motor on the left and the new Endura motor on the right, you can see that the screw holes don't line up. Some people say, just drill new holes in this plate. Personally, I think that's a lot of work. And, for I think it's like 50 cents more, Endura will send you a new plate. Just get the new plate. It'll make your life so much easier. So we're going to swap out this plate, and there's 4 screws that hold that in. And these screws are longer than the other screws we've been taking out, so just remember where they go when you put them back in. Now, when you take this last screw out, this actually holds the transmission case together too, so just be careful that everything stays together. The plate just lifts right off. There's our transmission. So we'll get our new plate out of the bag. And it also comes with a new pinion gear that we're going to put on the motor in a little while. So we'll get that out and just set it here. So this new plate just goes on just like the old one came off. Just like that. We'll go on and put the longer screws back in to hold everything together. Okay, and then we're going to take our motor, going to put it through, we're going to take our small motor screws, and just get one started in either of the holes that you can see through the motor plate. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. You don't need to tighten it all the way down, just enough to hold it in place. We'll adjust it in a little bit. Same thing with the other, just kind of get it started. Okay, so it's in there, and you can see our motor still moves up and down a little bit. We're going to put our spur gear back on. When you look at the spur gear, I don't know if you'll be able to tell in the video, but holding it, there's a little bit that sticks out in the middle of the spur gear, and on one side it sticks out further than the other. The side that sticks out further goes away from the plate. So in this side sticks out further, so I'm putting it on like this. Just gonna go on and take the nut and just tighten it down. Hand tighten. We're gonna get everything lined up first, and then we'll tighten everything up. There we go. Now, we're going to put our new pinion on. This pinion just slides on the motor. So I apologize. I did that in reverse. I should have put the pinion on and then put the spur gear on. So let's fix that real quick. So I just got the pinion started and just push it down. When you look at the pinion, I don't know if you can tell. See if I get the camera to focus on it. One side of the pinion gear doesn't have teeth on it. It's just a round ring. That part goes towards the motor. I think you can, maybe you can see. If you look at the stock one when you take it out, it's kind of the same way. So it goes on the same way. I'm just going to push this down. I'm sorry I'm doing it off the camera. I need both hands to do this. Okay, so you want to push it down. You want to push it down pretty far, but you don't want it to rub up against the motor because that'll make everything bind up. So again, I'm going to put my spur gear back on. Put the nut on to hold everything in place. Okay, so now we're going to set the mesh between the pinion and spur. You don't want it super tight because that will make the motor get too hot and bind up. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for just the slightest bit of play And again, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but the best way to do it is by feel. You can kind of feel, like right there, the spur gear is not moving at all. If I move the motor down a little bit, the spur gear is just barely moving back and forth before it hits the pinion, and that's what you want. You want just the slightest bit of play possible in it. So now we have a little issue here where I can't get to this screw because the spur gear, but that's okay. We've set the mesh and the motor's where it needs to be, so we can once again take the spur gear off, tighten this other screw down. The motor shouldn't have moved, so make sure you're putting your spur gear on the right way. And check your mesh again real quick, and that's good. Now we're going to go on and tighten this nut down again, holding on to the spur gear. Just tighten it down. Doesn't have to be tight, just snug where the spur gear is not moving around. There we go. So we're going to put our drive shaft back on, and the drive shaft has a D-shaped opening. So there's only one way it can go on this output shaft. So we're going to get that put on, get the screw put back in it. Now, before we do anything else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my battery. There's my battery. I'm going to plug up this motor and make sure everything's working. Nothing's binding up. Everything's working like it's supposed to before I put everything back together. Sorry, my camera didn't focus there. When you're plugging everything back up, pay really close attention. There's a spot to plug your motor and a spot to plug your battery. Don't get those reversed. So we're going to, I always plug in my motor first just to be sure, because that won't hurt anything if it's in the wrong spot. Okay, motor plugged in, battery plugged in. Turn on my radio, make sure I have the right radio. Okay, so now we're just going to pull the trigger and see what happens. So everything's working fine. This is the first time I've installed this motor. Some motors they'll run backwards. I don't know if that's the case with this one. If it is, it's an easy fix, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Hopefully we won't have to do that, but if we do, again, no big deal. So I'm going to go and turn everything off and unplug everything. Turn my radio off. I'm going to go on and put this motor back in the transmission. Now, when you pulled it out, the halves of the drive shaft came apart. You can try to line them up as you're putting it in, but that's kind of a pain, especially in the front. So what I do is I just go in and put it in. I don't worry about the drive shafts yet. I just get everything. Oh, I'm sorry. We need to put our transmission cover back on. Okay, so now we're going to put the motor and transmission back in. So again, just get your drive shafts just stuck down there. Don't worry about lining it up with the other half yet. I'm going to put in the top screw. Yep. Let's try again. There we go. I'm going to put in the two on the bottom. And I'm just putting them in. I'm not tightening them all the way down yet. I'm just getting them in there, getting it close to tight. But okay, now that they're in, I'll just go on and snug them all down. Tighten down the top one. Now we need to put our drive shafts back together. So the easiest way to do this, if you're still running the stock shocks, the easiest thing is just grab the top of the shock and twist it. It'll pop off. And that'll let the links come down enough where you can line up the two halves of the drive shaft. One thing I'm going to touch on here real quick. If you look at the drive shaft itself and look at the joint, see if I can get it in the light where you can see what I'm talking about. So you'll see that how they fit together. You'll hear people talking about phasing your drive shaft. So I'll show you what that means. I personally don't know how much good it does, but I do it anyway because, you know, why not? Better safe than sorry. So I'm going to pull this down and get my drive shaft lined up. And what I'm doing is, however this top shaft is lined up, so you see this is the open spot and the connections are on the side. Same thing down at the bottom. And I'm just going to put it up together. Then I'm going to pop my shocks back on. And now our rear drive shaft's in. Same thing in the front. Pull it down. Get the two halves lined up correctly. There we go. Sorry, it's kind of hard to do at this angle. Give me 1 second. Let me flip it around, see if I can do it better this way. It looks a lot harder than it is because I'm trying to do it on the camera where you guys can see it. There we go. Get them lined up. Pop your shocks back on. Now we have a nice new motor. Now remember earlier, I was talking about seeing if the motor went the right direction. Now we're going to find out. So I'm going to plug it up. Again, plug up the motor first. Plug up the battery. And then, hopefully, fingers crossed, if I pull the trigger, it goes forward. How about that? Okay, now we're ready to finish putting everything back together. So I'm going to turn everything off, unplug the battery, leave the motor plugged up. So this is our stock battery tray. In order to clear this bigger motor, we're going to need to cut this leg off, which is the leg that would normally go in that screw hole right there. You can see it interferes with the motor. I happen to already have one sitting here that's had that leg cut off, so through the magic of television, I'm just going to swap it out. So again, see this, I've already cut this is for a different project. I've already cut the leg off. I'm just going to put my battery strap back in. Then I'm going to put the 3 screws back in. Just make sure that your motor wire is not getting caught under anything. I just run it up next to the tray. So I'm going to put these screws back in. Okay, so there we have our new motor installed, hooked up. I'll probably do something later with these wires so they're not sticking up or something, but I don't know. That's just more of a cosmetic thing. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install these carbon chassis rails. So in order to install these rails, and I apologize, there is a lot of, we're going to be taking back apart some things we just put back together that we took apart before and put back together. That's just kind of the nature of working on one of these. If you're doing all the same upgrades that I'm doing, you could swap out the chassis rails as you're putting the new motor in, things like that. But I just want to show you the whole process because, you know, you may not do it the same way I do it. You may do one piece at a time. You may not want to do this upgrade. You may do something else. So I just want to show you the whole thing. When you're looking at these chassis rails, there's a groove on one side. That goes towards the center of the vehicle. That's how you know which is right and left. And also they're a little different back to front. But the easiest way to know is that groove goes against the vehicle like that. So to get started, I'm just going to start at the front and work my way back. I'm going to take out this screw that holds the bumper in. I'm going to just pop this shock off. I'm going to take off these two that hold on the receiver and ESC tray. I'm going to take out these four down here. You'll notice when you're taking them out, these are longer. There's four screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. The two on the outside are longer than the two on the inside. So just remember that when you put it back in. So you saw the one I just took out. And this is the one that just came out of there. It's a shorter screw. I'm just going to keep taking everything out, working my way down until I get to the back. Take out the screws that hold in the battery tray. And I'm going to replace the rail on one side and then the other. I think it's a lot easier to do that way instead of trying to do both sides at one time. I'll pop this rear shock off, and our rail will come off. Set this to the side for a second. So this rail has a rear shock mount. We're going to transfer it over to the new rail. We're just taking these screws out. And then I'm just going to put it next to it, and you can see the two that it just came out of line up with two in the new mount, or in the new rail. So that's where these are going to go. And both tighten down. Remember this little groove that we talked about? It lines up with this piece. There are two little posts in the center of it, and they go in the two center holes. So it's kind of hard to not get this put back on the correct direction. If everything kind of pops into place and lines up, you're good to go. There we go. So now I'm just going to start putting screws back in, and I start with the ones in the center. These are the ones closest to those two little posts I showed you, and they're short screws. So I just start with them to get everything lined up, and then just work my way towards each end. Okay, now the next two are the longer ones again. Make sure that they're going through your suspension links as well. This link slid a little bit, so I'm just going to get it lined up. Put the receiver tray screws back in. I might have missed when I was putting that in. I did. I'm going to move this off the camera just a second, just so I can get it lined up. There we go. So I just need to get a better angle at it. Top one back in. I'll put the bumper back in, and there's a little post on the bumper that lines up with the back hole in the front of this rail. I'm going to put our front shock back on. Battery tray screws. Wound up. Okay, sorry about that. Wound up, pop our shock back on. And there's one side complete. The other side's the exact same way, with the exception of if you've installed the motor and cut this leg off, you won't have a screw there. So let's get the other one on and then we'll take a look at the finished product. Okay, so there's both chassis rails installed. So what we've done in this video is we have lowered the center of gravity. Remember the demonstration earlier, talking about why that's important. We've also made it wider to help on side hills and things like that to keep from tipping over sideways. We added these links to just give a little bit more clearance when crawling over rocks and obstacles. And of course, let's not forget, we upgraded the horsepower. With these modifications, plus the ones from the first video, the wheels and tires, the servo, steering link, I think this makes a really, really solid rock crawler. I would, I can't think of anything else right off the bat that I'd want to change or make better. Of course, there are certain things you can move around and try and see if you like, things like that. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more videos like this, please let me know. Comment, like, subscribe, things like that. If there's anything in particular that you want to see, a certain upgrade that you're curious about and would like to see how it works, leave me a comment and I'll see what I can do about that. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.